My dear friends and keen observers of the human condition, welcome. I'm Dr. John Watson, and tonight I invite you to join Mr. Sherlock Holmes and me on an extraordinary journey into the labyrinthine shadows of Victorian London. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to delve into a mystery where the faint glow of a candle casts an unsettling light upon the deepest secrets of the human heart, where ancient rites meet modern avarice, and where the keenest intellect is the only beacon against the encroaching darkness. It is a tale of obsession, of a scholar's ultimate quest, and a discovery that chilled us to the very bone. So, draw close, perhaps with a warm drink by your side, for the chill of the crypt awaits us. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, that you might never miss our future adventures. Now, let's begin with the first chapter of The Candle in the Crypt. Chapter 1. The Crypt's Cold Embrace. The gaslights of Baker Street had barely begun their evening dance, casting a familiar, comforting glow upon the damp pavement, when a frantic knock shattered the tranquillity of our rooms. It was a raw, blustery Tuesday in early November, the kind of evening that sends sensible Londoners scurrying indoors, but for Sherlock Holmes and myself, it merely heralded the arrival of another deviation from the mundane. Our visitor, a thin, almost skeletal man wrapped in a threadbare overcoat, introduced himself as Mr. Hemlock, butler to the late Professor Silas Thorne, a name known to scholars of ancient languages but a mere whisper to the wider world. His voice trembled, not solely from the cold, but from a profound, unarticulated dread. "A dreadful discovery, Mr. Holmes," he stammered, wringing his hands. "Professor Thorne, found in the family crypt. Unnatural stillness, sir. No signs of violence yet. He is gone." Holmes, ever alert, rose from his armchair, his eyes, usually alight with intellectual vigour, now sharpened with an immediate, almost predatory focus. "Pray, compose yourself, Mr. Hemlock. Give us the particulars." The butler, fortified by a sip of my brandy, recounted the grim details. Professor Thorne, a reclusive academic, had been pursuing some arcane research in recent weeks, often retreating to the private Thorne family crypt, located on the secluded grounds of his Hampstead estate. This morning, after the professor failed to appear for breakfast, Mr. Hemlock had ventured to the crypt to fetch him, only to find him as described. He insisted the crypt had been locked from the inside, a detail that piqued Holmes's immediate interest. "Locked from within, you say?" Holmes mused, a flicker of thought crossing his features. "And the professor's key?" "Still on his person, sir. At least, that is what the constabulary informed me. They are quite at a loss, naturally." Within the hour, Holmes and I were rattling through the labyrinthine streets of London in a hansom cab. The cab's wheels splashing through puddles, its lamps cutting swathes through the thick clinging fog that had descended with the night. The journey to Hampstead, typically a 20-minute affair, stretched into a solemn, almost funereal procession, as the mist seemed to swallow the familiar landmarks. Upon arrival at the Thorne estate, a sprawling, albeit somewhat decaying Victorian mansion shrouded by ancient oaks, the air grew noticeably colder, laden with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The private crypt, a sombre stone edifice nestled amidst a small, overgrown churchyard behind the mansion, loomed before us, a grim monument to forgotten generations. A single constable stood guard at its entrance, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "Holmes, this place fairly reeks of melancholy," I observed, my breath catching in my throat. "Indeed, Watson, a fitting stage, perhaps, for a drama of the most singular nature." The interior of the crypt was surprisingly spacious, with vaulted ceilings and niches housing dusty caskets. The air within was heavy, stale, and possessed a peculiar faint aroma, almost metallic, yet with an undertone of something earthy and acrid. In the centre, amidst the hushed silence of the entombed, lay Professor Thorne. He was sprawled awkwardly on the cold flagstones, an elderly gentleman of slender build, dressed in a faded velvet dressing gown, his spectacles still perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. His expression was one of profound repose, almost serenity, though the circumstances of his passing lent it a ghastly quality. There was no blood, no disarrangement of clothing beyond his awkward posture, nothing immediately suggestive of foul play in the conventional sense. Holmes knelt beside the deceased, his long, delicate fingers swiftly and deftly examining the man without disturbing him unduly. Notice, Watson, the absence of disarray. No struggle, no sign of forced entry or hurried exit. Most peculiar for a man found dead in such a place, especially one locked from within. My gaze fell upon a peculiar item clutched loosely in the professor's right hand, a short, thick candle, unlike any I had ever seen. It was made of a dark, waxy substance, almost black, and gave off a faint, oily sheen even in the dim lantern light. It had burned down by approximately a third of its length. "A candle, Holmes," I pointed out, my voice hushed, "and a strange one at that." Holmes took it gently, examining it with the intensity reserved for the most crucial of clues. "Indeed, Watson. Observe the residue. A dark, sooty wax, yet the wick is unlike conventional cotton. And the scent. It is subtle, but quite distinct from ordinary paraffin. Almost an herbal medicinal quality, overlaid with something heavier, like burnt resins." He sniffed it carefully, then handed it to me. I inhaled, detecting the faint, complex aroma he described, a scent that seemed to cling to the very air of the crypt. Holmes then scrutinized the flagstones around the professor. "And here, Watson, is our first puzzle within a puzzle. The dust on the floor, disturbed only in a small radius around the professor. Yet look closely here, near the entrance, and again by this sarcophagus." He indicated faint, nearly invisible scuff marks, distinct from the constable's heavy boots. "Two sets of footprints, not simply the professor's, nor those of Mr. Hemlock or the constabulary, I dare say. One set is small, almost delicate, the other quite large and distinct, with a peculiar pattern on the heel." He then rose, his gaze sweeping the crypt, his analytical mind already sifting through the evidence. He noted the crypt's ventilation shafts, unusually narrow and high, caked with centuries of grime. "An enclosed space, Watson, but not hermetically sealed. There are faint air currents, though stagnant, and the scent. It is strongest near the professor, certainly, but a fainter echo pervades the entire chamber." "The peculiar candle, Holmes. Could it be the cause?" I ventured, thinking of some noxious fumes. "Perhaps, my dear Watson, but not in the conventional sense. The burn is too limited, and the professor's repose too undisturbed. No, this candle, this peculiar implement, suggests purpose, ritual even, not mere accident or crude murder. What was Professor Thorne doing down here, in the dead of night, with such a strange light source? And who else was present, leaving those telltale impressions?" Holmes's eyes, glinting in the lantern light, settled upon a small, leather-bound volume lying partially concealed beneath the professor's outstretched arm. He retrieved it, revealing an ancient, fragile manuscript fragment, adorned with faded script and curious, almost astrological symbols. "Ah, Watson, the very heart of the professor's obsession, I suspect, and perhaps the key to our understanding. This is no mere academic curiosity, but a coded message, or perhaps a map." He carefully tucked the manuscript fragment into his breast pocket, his mind already formulating theories. As we departed the chilling embrace of the crypt, the fog outside seemed to press in even more thickly, as if to guard the secrets within. Holmes's silence on the handsome ride back to Baker Street was absolute, broken only by the occasional thoughtful sigh. I knew his mind was already miles ahead, weaving the disparate threads into the beginning of a cohesive tapestry. The peculiar candle, the ancient script, the two sets of footprints, and the strange lingering aroma, each a distinct note in the prelude to a symphony of deduction. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Bazaar. The biting wind had subsided by morning, replaced by a persistent drizzle that slicked the grime-encrusted cobblestones of the East End. Holmes, ever impervious to such meteorological caprices, insisted we immerse ourselves in the pulsing, chaotic heart of London's myriad markets. "The scent of the crypt, Watson," he explained, as our hansom navigated the treacherous lanes of Whitechapel, dodging fruit carts and jostling pedestrians, had a peculiar earthy component, blended with the resinous tang of that unusual candle. It spoke not of Hampstead's manicured gardens, but of something deeper, older, perhaps even imported. And the professor's manuscript fragment, it suggested a quest for the arcane, a pursuit that often leads to the less savoury corners of commerce. Our destination was a dimly lit establishment tucked away in a narrow alley off Petticoat Lane, an antique dealer's shop named Crouch's Curiosities. The windows were crammed with an eclectic jumble of forgotten treasures and dubious artefacts, creating an opaque shield against the bustling world outside. The air within was thick with the dust of ages, the smell of old wood, brass polish, and something indefinably musty. Behind a towering stack of oriental rugs, a figure emerged from the gloom. Mr. Ebenezer Crouch was a man whose features seemed to have been carved from ancient oak, gnarled, weathered, and with eyes as sharp and acquisitive as a magpie's. He possessed a wiry frame and the sort of perpetually suspicious demeanour common to those who dealt in items of questionable provenance. "Mr. Crouch, I presume?" Holmes greeted, his voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere of the shop. "My name is Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are making inquiries regarding the late Professor Silas Thorne." Crouch's eyes, which had initially flickered with professional disinterest, now narrowed with a flicker of something akin to unease. "Professor Thorne, eh? A discerning gentleman, albeit a peculiar one. What business might you have with him now that he's unavailable?" "Our business, Mr. Crouch, concerns certain items he may have purchased from you recently," Holmes replied, his gaze sweeping the cluttered shelves, observing the minute details. "Specifically, something that might aid in the deciphering of ancient texts or locating forgotten relics." Crouch gave a non-committal grunt. "Professor Thorne was a frequent patron, always after the rare and the obscure. Can't precisely recall every bauble he ever laid hands on." He gestured vaguely at the chaos surrounding them. Holmes stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The earth on your boots, Mr. Crouch, is of a distinct reddish hue, quite unlike the London clay, and the faint, almost imperceptible residue on your hands under your nails. It carries the same unique mineral signature. You have, I surmise, been handling newly unearthed items not found within the city limits." Crouch visibly stiffened, his eyes darting about as if seeking an escape. "What of it? I import from all corners of the globe. A man must make a living." "Indeed," Holmes conceded smoothly. "But the Professor was interested in local law, was he not? Of places near London yet forgotten, a recent acquisition perhaps that involved a specific type of excavation. A brass compass, intricately etched, perhaps with arcane symbols." The old dealer's composure finally fractured. He sighed, a sound like rustling parchment. "Aye, a compass. Sold it to him last week. Queerest thing. From an old dig site near an abandoned manor in Surrey. Some old family crypt, ironically. Paid a handsome sum, he did." He reached under a dusty counter and produced a small velvet-lined box. "Still have the matching case if you're interested. But the compass itself, with its peculiar, almost unnatural sheen, that went to the Professor." Holmes examined the empty case, noting its fine craftsmanship. "And did the Professor mention its intended use?" "Only that it was a directional key to unlock celestial alignments in his research," Crouch grumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "Sounded like poppycock to me, but money's money." Holmes's eyes lit up. "A directional key? Celestial alignments? This aligns perfectly with the fragment we discovered. Tell me, Mr. Crouch, did you notice anything unusual about the Professor on that last visit? Any particular urgency, or perhaps a companion?" Crouch hesitated, stroking his chin. "Companion, no, he was always a lone wolf. But urgency? Aye, he seemed agitated, insisted on immediate delivery, said it was for a matter of utmost temporal importance. Left me a note for payment, actually. Oddest thing." He rummaged in a drawer and produced a small folded piece of paper. Holmes took the note. It was not a conventional receipt, but a hastily scribbled instruction on coarse yellowish paper, bearing the Professor's erratic signature. But it was the watermark Holmes found intriguing, a faint, almost invisible image of a serpent coiling around a staff. "This paper, Mr. Crouch, where did you acquire it?" "Came with a job lot of old ledgers from a print shop that went bust years ago in Clerkenwell. Uncommon stock even then." As we left Crouch's curiosities, the drizzle continued its relentless patter. Holmes was deep in thought. "The compass, Watson, found at an old dig site. The reddish soil, peculiar to Surrey. The Professor's urgency, his cryptic remarks, and this unique paper with its serpentine watermark. These are not disparate threads, but strands from the same spool." Just then, a small grimy street urchin, no older than 10, darted out from behind a fishmonger's stall. "Gunnar, are you the copper looking for answers about old Professor Thorne?" he piped up, his eyes bright with mischief and street wisdom. Holmes paused, a rare, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I'm not a copper, young man, but I am certainly looking for answers, and I dare say you might have some." He offered the boy a shilling. The urchin, whose name he informed us was Spud, pocketed the coin with practised ease. "Saw him, I did. Few days afore. Near his London townhouse, not the big house in Hampstead. He was meeting someone late at night, a tall, well-dressed gentleman with a fine silver-tipped cane. They spoke in hushed tones, then the gentleman slipped something to the professor. Looked like a small, shiny box. Then he walked off, fast as a shadow, towards the river." A tall, well-dressed gentleman with a silver-tipped cane meeting the professor secretly and handing him a small, shiny box, Holmes murmured, his eyes distant. "And walking towards the river. Excellent, Spud. Your observations are quite valuable." He gave the boy another shilling. The new clues, the compass from a Surrey crypt, the unique serpentine watermarked paper, and the shadowy figure with his silver-tipped cane near the Thames, began to coalesce into a clearer, albeit still opaque, picture for Holmes. The professor's death was becoming less an isolated event and more a culmination of an intricate, dangerous pursuit. The East End, with its ancient secrets and transient characters, had yielded a crucial piece of the puzzle, guiding us toward the next potential arena of discovery. Chapter 3. The Scholar's Labyrinth. The ceaseless drizzle of the East End gave way to a crisp, almost biting air as we journeyed westward, the sky clearing to reveal a pale, wintry sun. Holmes had determined our next port of call was the British Museum's revered Reading Room, a majestic dome of scholarly pursuit. "The professor's manuscript fragment, Watson," Holmes explained as we ascended the grand staircase, "contains symbols consistent with early alchemical texts and celestial cartography. If he was truly engaged in a search for a celestial cipher, as Mr. Crouch suggested, then the academic heart of London is where we must seek further enlightenment. The colossal reading room, with its hushed atmosphere and rows of intent scholars poring over ancient tomes, presented a stark contrast to the cacophony of the East End bazaar. The scent here was of old paper, leather bindings, and hushed reverence. We sought out the head librarian, who, after some persuasion and the mention of Inspector Lestrade, directed us to Miss Eleanor Vance, a young, earnest research assistant known for her encyclopedic knowledge of obscure historical documents and her close collaboration with Professor Thorne. Miss Vance, a woman of sharp intellect and nervous energy, with a perpetual smudge of ink on her finger, greeted us with a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed distress. She was seated at a large oak table, surrounded by an impressive array of weighty volumes. "Poor Professor Thorne," she sighed, adjusting her spectacles. "He was such a brilliant, if utterly consumed, mind. He was just on the cusp of something truly remarkable, I feel certain." "Indeed," Holmes began, "we understand he was deeply engrossed in a search for something he termed this celestial cipher. Can you elaborate on this, Miss Vance?" Miss Vance's eyes widened with a scholarly intensity. "Oh, yes. It's a legendary manuscript, a grimoire of sorts, believed to hold the key to ancient planetary alignments and their influence on earthly events. Professor Thorne was convinced it existed, hidden away for centuries, perhaps within a private crypt or in forgotten vault, precisely because its knowledge was deemed too powerful for ordinary men. He believed the true location was coded within a series of other, seemingly innocuous, historical texts." She gestured to the open books around her. "And what was his most promising lead?" Holmes pressed, his gaze not just on Miss Vance, but subtly scanning her surroundings, noting the specific text she had open, the worn pages, the faint annotations. He was obsessed with a set of astronomical charts by a Renaissance alchemist, a certain Dr. Ignatius Blackwood. He believed Dr. Blackwood had encoded a celestial compass within his works, which would point to the cipher's resting place. He spoke of a critical junction, a point of convergence he was close to identifying. Her voice grew animated, her hands fluttering as she spoke. "And did the professor communicate with others regarding this pursuit?" Miss Vance hesitated, her gaze flickering to a specific heavy tome on the table. He did correspond with a Dr. Alistair MacGregor, a scholar from Edinburgh also, he claimed, though Professor Thorne was notoriously secretive. He showed me a few letters, but they were quite cryptic, almost guarded. The professor was very protective of his research, you see. Holmes picked up the specific tome Miss Vance had glanced at, a heavily annotated copy of Dr. Blackwood's collected works. He ran a finger over the spine, then opened it to a page marked with a thin strip of ribbon. He noted the precise, almost obsessive annotations in the margins, clearly in Professor Thorne's hand. The Professor's own notes appear quite thorough, yet there's something here. A particular diagram, heavily underlined, depicting a specific constellation, and a marginal note here, the serpent's eye where paths converge. This resonates with the serpentine watermark on the paper Mr. Crouch had. Miss Vance nodded vigorously. Precisely. He believed the serpent's eye constellation was the celestial key. He often spoke of finding a unique instrument, a divining compass, that would activate at this convergence point. A divining compass? Holmes echoed thoughtfully. Which brings us to the shadowy figure seen meeting the Professor near his townhouse, handing him a small shiny box. Did Professor Thorne ever mention acquiring such an instrument, or indeed meeting anyone of that description recently? Miss Vance wrung her hands. He was so secretive in his last few days. He mentioned nothing, though he did seem exceptionally preoccupied, even for him. He spoke of a final test, a grand experiment. He looked quite flushed, agitated, and he kept referring to a very old private garden, part of his family's ancestral lands near the Thames, where he believed certain energies might be stronger. Holmes's eyes, which had been observing her intently, now seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed scholarly facade. Miss Vance, you speak of Professor Thorne's agitation and his final experiment, yet you seem unusually well versed in the specifics of his most guarded, even eccentric theories. You appear to understand the significance of the serpent's eye, the celestial compass, and the divining aspect with remarkable clarity, despite his supposed secrecy. He paused, allowing the weight of his observation to settle. And these particular arcane symbols you've been tracing on this scratch pad here, he indicated a pad beside her, covered in complex geometrical and astrological symbols, bear a striking resemblance to those on Professor Thorne's own manuscript fragment. Miss Vance coloured faintly, her fingers nervously adjusting her spectacles. I was merely trying to follow his line of reasoning, Mr. Holmes. It's a fascinating field, you understand. Her explanation sounded thin, a slight tremor in her voice betraying her unease. I only ever saw him at the museum. The garden. That's merely what he mentioned in passing. Indeed, Holmes said, his expression unreadable. A fascinating field, as you say. Tell me, Miss Vance, when was the last time you saw Professor Thorne in person? Only 2 days before. The discovery. He came here, to the reading room, to consult a specific map of old London estates. He seemed quite breathless, almost triumphant. And the map? It was of the area around his Hampstead estate, but specifically focusing on the old Thorne family lands, including the long-abandoned gardens and their adjacent riverside stretch. Holmes merely nodded, accepting this, yet I noted the subtle change in his posture, the slight tightening around his eyes. He had observed more than just Miss Vance's words. He had seen the subtle tells of her discomfort, the way she over-explained certain aspects, and the precise books she had been consulting. The connection between the Professor's research, the peculiar compass, and now a specific, long-forgotten garden was becoming undeniably strong. The British Museum had not only deepened our understanding of the Professor's obsession, but had also introduced a new, intriguing, and somewhat evasive character, who clearly held more than just a passing interest in his final, fatal quest. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Overgrowth. A bitter wind had swept through London overnight, clearing the last vestiges of fog and rain, leaving behind a sky of steely grey. The city now seemed starker, colder, its secrets laid bare under the unforgiving light of a late autumn afternoon. Following Miss Vance's revealing, if somewhat circuitous, information, Holmes directed our hansom towards the periphery of Professor Thorne's Hampstead estate, specifically the neglected expanse of the ancestral gardens she had mentioned. The reddish soil on Mr. Crouch's boots, Watson, Holmes elucidated as we clattered along a less frequented lane. And the Professor's interest in energies within his family's ancestral lands near the Thames. These pieces fit the geography of the old Thorne gardens perfectly. Such places, especially those allowed to run wild, often retain echoes of their past, not merely in decaying structures, but in forgotten objects and overgrown pathways. The taxi eventually deposited us at a crumbling stone wall, partially swallowed by ivy, marking the forgotten boundary of the Thorne estate. Beyond it lay a landscape of wild, untamed beauty. Ancient, gnarled trees formed a skeletal canopy, their bare branches clawing at the sky. A winding, barely discernible path, choked with brambles and fallen leaves, led deeper into the overgrown wilderness. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying foliage, and the faint metallic tang of the nearby river. The atmosphere here was one of profound neglect, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of more affluent estates, hinting at a family whose fortunes, or perhaps interests, had long since waned. As we pushed through a particularly dense thicket, we stumbled upon what appeared to be the ruins of a small grotto, its stonework crumbling, shrouded in moss. A sense of desolation clung to the place, amplified by the mournful rustle of the wind through the tall grasses. Holmes immediately knelt, his keen eyes scanning the ground. "Ah, Watson, our quarry, I believe." He pointed to a small patch of recently disturbed earth, partly concealed by a low-hanging fern. It was evident someone had been digging here, and not long ago. The soil here was indeed a distinct reddish-brown, precisely matching the residue Holmes had observed in Crouch's shop. Carefully, Holmes sifted through the loose earth. His fingers, agile and precise, soon discovered a small, intricately worked fragment of what appeared to be glass or crystalline material. "Observe this, Watson. This is no mere shard of a broken bottle. The curvature, the internal striations, it is a piece of an alchemical retort used for distillation or chemical reactions. A very old one, judging by its composition. And look here, a faint impression in the soil, quite distinctive." He indicated a clear, albeit shallow imprint of a signet ring bearing a crest, a rearing lion above a cluster of 3 stars. "An alchemical retort fragment and a signet ring impression," I murmured, noting the significance. "The professor's research into alchemy, perhaps?" "Undoubtedly, Watson. The celestial cipher was likely not merely a textual secret, but a practical one, involving arcane science. This retort fragment suggests experimentation, and the signet ring, a personal mark, perhaps indicating a specific individual." As Holmes continued his meticulous examination, a figure emerged from the depths of the overgrown garden, startling us both. It was an old man, stooped and weathered, with a face like a roadmap of wrinkles and eyes the colour of faded denim. He leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick, his clothes patched and mud-stained. "Who be ye, trespassing on Thornland?" the man croaked, his voice raspy with age and disuse. "This ain't no public thoroughfare." Holmes turned, his demeanour instantly shifting to one of polite deference. "My apologies, my good man. We are here on official inquiry. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are investigating the unfortunate demise of Professor Silas Thorne. Are you the groundskeeper, perhaps?" The old man squinted at us, a flicker of suspicion in his rheumy eyes. "Silas Crumb, I am. Been tending these grounds, or what's left of 'em, near 50 year. Knew the professor since he was a lad, always with his head in them dusty books even then." "Mr. Crumb," Holmes pressed gently, "did you ever see Professor Thorne frequenting this particular grotto, or perhaps engaging in any unusual activities within the gardens?" Crumb shuffled his feet, his gaze wandering to the disturbed earth. "Aye, the professor. Always had a soft spot for this old grotto. Said it was a place of power, where the whispers from the earth were strongest. He used to come here late at night sometimes, even in his younger days, and in the last few weeks he was here often, seemed quite invigorated, always carrying a satchel and a lamp, even when the moon was bright." "And did he ever have company, Mr. Crumb?" Holmes asked, his eyes never leaving the old man's face. "A young gentleman, perhaps, well-dressed, with a silver-tipped cane?" Crumb frowned, tapping his stick on the ground. "A well-dressed young gentleman, you say?" "Aye, there was one. Young Mr. Reginald, the professor's nephew, always keen on what the professor was up to. Said he was looking out for his uncle's best interests. Used to walk with a fancy cane, too. Came round a fair bit in recent months more than before, always asking about old family legends and hidden treasures. He even helped the professor clear away some of the brambles near this very grotto just last week. Saw him with the professor a couple of times carrying tools, even spotted him carrying a small heavy box out of here, late one evening, after the professor had already left." "Mr. Reginald Thorne, the nephew," Holmes murmured, committing the name to memory. "And he was carrying a small heavy box from this grotto. Can you describe it, Mr. Crumb?" "Just a metal box, shiny. Couldn't say what was in it, but he seemed in a hurry. not his usual strolling pace, and he looked a bit, well, triumphant if I had to put a word to it. Holmes thanked the old groundskeeper, his mind now racing. The narrative was becoming clearer, intricate and unsettling. The presence of the alchemical retort fragment here, coupled with the signet ring impression and the discovery of Reginald Thorne's involvement, provided a compelling link. The small, shiny box mentioned by Spud, the street urchin, now had a possible identity, the missing part of the retort or some other object crucial to the professor's final experiment. The old taciturn groundskeeper, a repository of local gossip and history, had unwittingly provided the most significant piece of the puzzle yet, bringing into sharp relief the shadowy figure lurking in the background of Professor Thorne's final, fatal quest. The abandoned garden, once a place of quiet contemplation, now resonated with the echoes of a darker purpose. Chapter 5. The Unveiling of Shadows. The gas lamps of Baker Street flickered invitingly as we returned to 221B. The chill of the overgrown garden still clinging to our coats. The night had drawn in, and a storm, long brewing, now unleashed its fury upon London, the rain lashing against our windows, mirroring the tumultuous thoughts within my own mind. Holmes, however, seemed utterly untroubled by the tempest, his features alight with an almost serene satisfaction. He sat by the fire, a collection of objects laid out meticulously on our Persian rug, the dark, peculiar candle, the fragment of the professor's manuscript, the serpentine water-marked paper, the empty compass case and the shard of the alchemical retort. "Watson," Holmes began, breaking the silence, his voice calm and measured, "we have journeyed from the stillness of the crypt to the clamour of the bazaar, from the hallowed halls of academia to the desolate beauty of an ancient garden, and each step has brought us closer to the heart of the matter." I settled into my armchair, eager for his synthesis. "Indeed, Holmes, but the pieces still feel disparate. How do they truly connect to Professor Thorne's death? Consider, my dear fellow, Professor Thorne was not simply a scholar, he was an obsessive. His celestial cipher was not a metaphorical pursuit, but a literal one, a belief in a physical text that unlocked cosmic secrets. He believed this text was hidden, and he sought a divining compass to find it, one that responded to celestial alignments and energies he believed strongest in his ancestral lands, particularly the grotto." Holmes picked up the dark candle. "This candle, found in his hand, is key. I have had it analysed by a contact at St. Bartholomew's. Its composition is unique, a blend of rare beeswax, certain exotic resins, and a minute quantity of a specific sedative herb. Its burn rate is slow, its fumes faintly soporific in a confined space. It was not intended to merely illuminate, but to create a specific atmospheric effect for his ritual, a haze that would heighten perception, or perhaps induce a trance-like state during his final experiment. So, he performed a ritual in the crypt. Precisely. The compass which Mr. Crouch supplied was the physical, directional key. The professor, in his agitated state, believing he was on the cusp of discovery, used it in conjunction with his alchemical retort to distill the celestial energies at the point of convergence, the grotto where he had buried the retort. He then intended to use the compass's true guidance within the crypt, believing the cipher was hidden there, the serpent's eye constellation, the alchemical symbols on his manuscript, the serpentine watermark, all pointed to this specific complex ritual. But how did he die, Holmes, if he was merely performing an experiment? He did not die during the experiment in the grotto, Watson. He died in the crypt as we found him, and that, my friend, is where Reginald Thorne, his nephew, enters our narrative. Reginald, as Mr. Crumb observed, was unusually interested in his uncle's legends and treasures. He helped his uncle with the preparations in the grotto, perhaps even procured some of the materials, including the alchemical retort. He knew of the professor's frail health and his fanatical pursuit. He also knew his uncle often retreated to the crypt, especially when close to a breakthrough. The small, shiny box Reginald was seen carrying from the grotto was likely the most valuable part of the alchemical retort, or perhaps the finished distillate. Either way, something valuable he took after his uncle left it. Reginald, driven by a desire to inherit the estate and prevent his uncle from squandering the family fortune on these fruitless pursuits, saw an opportunity. He assisted his uncle in placing the retort in the grotto, then, crucially, When his uncle descended into the crypt, Reginald followed. He knew the professor would engage in his ritual, burning the sedative candle in the enclosed space. He did not physically harm his uncle, Watson. He simply waited. He allowed the candle's fumes, combined with the professor's advanced age, his excitement, and the confined, poorly ventilated space to take their toll. The professor, in his trance-like state, succumbed quietly, painlessly, a victim of his own obsession and his nephew's calculating patience. Reginald then removed the evidence of the primary ritual, the retort, the treasure from the grotto, to make it seem like a mysterious natural death, or perhaps a failed experiment, leaving only the candle as a red herring. The signet ring impression, Holmes, belonged to Reginald. He left it inadvertently in the disturbed earth of the grotto when retrieving the valuable parts of the retort after his uncle had concluded his part of the ritual and gone to the crypt. Mr. Crumb saw him with the professor, helping, and later saw him carrying something away. Reginald feigned concern while subtly removing key evidence. He sealed the crypt from the outside after his uncle had already locked himself in from within for his ritual, thus ensuring no one would disturb him, or, more importantly, discover his natural passing until it was too late. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. The professor had not been murdered in the conventional sense, but rather left to die deliberately. It was a crime of cold calculation, of passive malice. Just then, a knock at the door, less frantic than Mr. Hemlock's, but firm. Holmes had, of course, arranged for Inspector Lestrade to bring Reginald Thorne to Baker Street under some pretext. Reginald Thorne entered, a man of immaculate dress and polished manners, initially expressing appropriate concern, but with a barely perceptible glint of self-satisfaction in his eyes. Holmes, without preamble, laid out his deductions, presenting each clue, each observation, with the dispassionate logic of a surgeon. The unique candle, the specific soil, the movements of the nephew, the fragment of the retort, the signet ring impression, and the motive of inheritance. He painted a portrait of a man who orchestrated his uncle's death through careful inaction, leveraging the old scholar's eccentricities against him. Reginald's composure slowly crumbled, his face draining of colour as Holmes meticulously dismantled his carefully constructed alibi, exposing the chilling truth beneath. By the time Holmes finished, the nephew was a broken man, muttering confessions under his breath, the weight of his calculated cruelty finally crushing him. The storm outside raged on, a fitting backdrop to the unravelled tragedy. Holmes merely gazed into the fire, a profound weariness briefly etching itself upon his features. Another shadow lifted, Watson, but the darkness, I fear, is inexhaustible. I poured us both a fresh cup of tea, the warmth a welcome contrast to the cold rationality of the case. The candle in the crypt had indeed cast a long, unsettling shadow, revealing not a monstrous killer but something far more insidious, the cold, calculating heart of human greed. Thank you for joining us on